this month, a man named Patrick Lyoya was shot and killed by a police officer after he was pulled over for allegedly driving with an unregistered license plate. He ran, the police chased him, there was a struggle, and an officer shot the unarmed man in the back of the head while he was face down on the ground. It's hard to even say that out loud. Now, when we hear that story, most of us ask, what is wrong with our country when an unregistered license plate gets you the death penalty? But there's another question out there, one that gets asked a lot after police shootings. Why didn't he just comply? So tonight, let's talk about that in a segment called How Did We Get Here? Police shootings are one of those things you need to talk about even though you don't really want to, like prostate health or the fact that Mamma Mia is really just a musical episode of Maury. White privilege is having three men who might be your baby daddy and still somehow getting played by Meryl Streep. So tonight, we're not going to go into the details of the latest horrific police shooting. Instead, we'll step back and talk about a bigger question. Why don't Black people just comply with the police? Now, there are a million reasons why a person might not comply in any given situation, but we are only going to focus on two, okay? The first is easy. When Black people encounter the police, they're often terrified. If you're a Black person in America, you've seen a million viral videos of Black people being murdered by the police. So when you see the police, even if you've done nothing wrong, you can feel like you are in danger. And when you're in danger, you want to get out of danger, which is why running can seem like a good option. Now, it can be hard for some white people to understand being scared of cops. Maybe in your life, the police have always been there to help you. And it's hard to believe that that's not true for everyone. It's like finding out that the life jacket you use to keep you afloat is actually a lead vest when put on someone else. And for Black people, the different treatment by police isn't just perception, it's reality. Findings from New York City's stop and frisk data shows that compared to white residents, Black residents are 17% more likely to experience police use of hands, 18% more likely to be pushed into walls or the ground, 24% more likely to have a weapon pointed at them, and 25% more likely to be pepper sprayed or hit by a baton. So it makes perfect sense that Black people are fearful of police. And you act irrationally when you think something is going to cause you pain. It's the same reason I scream every time I see a hot comb. Oh, my ear. And it gets worse. According to a 2019 study, Black men are more than 3 times more likely to be killed by police over the course of their lifetime than white men. So when a Black man gets stopped by police and runs, that's actually pretty rational. But if it's still hard for white people to understand, here's another way to think about it. What if Black people react to police the same way white people react to Black people? Studies have repeatedly shown that white people perceive Black people as more violent and more likely to commit crimes, even though that's not true. In one study, where white participants were shown a slideshow of random people's faces, Black males were seen as more threatening than white males, which is horrible. The only time looking at a face should be threatening is when you come across a coworker on Hinge. Do you swipe right to be nice? Do you swipe left to make it less awkward? Neither. You quit your job and you leave the country. But the racism doesn't stop at faces. A University of Wisconsin study found that when people consider how dangerous a neighborhood is, they don't base it on the crime rate. They base it on how much of the population is young Black men. That's right. If there are young Black men, then it is automatically dangerous, which is insane. If that were accurate, the scariest place in America would have been the set of A Different World. And hey, feelings are just feelings, except for one tiny thing. When white people feel like they're in danger, they call the police, those very same police who are killing Black men at over 3 times the rate of white men. White people love calling the cops so much you would think they'd have a punch card where the 10th call gets them a free sandwich. And let's be honest, maybe there is a certain kind of white person that just likes to stir things up. Who am I thinking of? Sophie. Girl, you invited all 3 dads to a weird island when you could have just sent them an email? And you didn't even tell your mom? Girl, you don't want a wedding. You want drama. Now, it's important to note that white people don't call the police on everyone. One study of a mostly white community in Austin, Texas, found that when residents saw a suspicious person who was Black, they called the police 60% of the time, and only 10% of the time when they were white. Basically, white people decide black people are dangerous, so they call the cops. Black people understand the inherent danger of interacting with cops, so they freak out. And when they freak out, the cops decide they're dangerous. It's a cycle of fear that keeps leading back to black people getting killed. But all this is just part of the reason why a black person might not comply with the police. The second part of that is complying doesn't guarantee your safety. Since 2015, 625 black people were running away from the police when they were shot and killed, which is terrifying. But even scarier, 875 of them weren't. The fact is, sometimes running away gets you killed, and sometimes staying still also gets you killed. Now, I'm a black lady who grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. I do not have the time to tell you about all my police run-ins. Wait, maybe I do. Those motherfuckers have pulled a gun on me multiple times. A gun. On this. So the next time someone asks why black people don't just comply with the police, feel free to tell them exactly how we got here.